This is part 2 of lecture 12. The most prominent person in Mexico today is Carlos Slim. He is actually the richest man in the world. He has over $70 billion. He actually has more money than Bill Gates, because Bill Gates has given about $10 billion of his own money to Africa to help combat diseases, mosquito infestation, and things like that. He owns, among other things, a Mexican telephone company called Telmex. And he himself earns about 7% of all that Mexico makes in a year. He's extremely rich. Looking at Mexico City, which is the largest city in Latin America, maybe the largest city in the world, it has roughly 30 million people that live there. It's very polluted, as you can see from this photograph. It's very foggy. The camera's not working very well. There we go. Part of the problem is that any air or winds that come up over Mexico City just kind of keep on moving over the top. And so any smog, smoke, pollution that gets released up here just kind of sits. It doesn't get carried on over. It just kind of goes up and then kind of stays back down. So Mexico City typically sits in a smog, which is a kind of a mix of smoke and fog. The other problem with Mexico City is that it sits on some loose ash and old dried lava. And it also sits on a fault line. So if an earthquake happens, it is possible that this stuff could turn into liquid and the whole city could sink. In Central America, there are 3 major crops: bananas, coffee, and tobacco. Bananas, typically they'll pick them green in huge bunches, load them on a boat, and the shipments will come into one of several major ports. One of the most important banana ports in America is Gulfport, Mississippi. And you can see the ships come in from Honduras, and they'll come to Gulfport, and they'll load the bananas onto the trucks, and the trucks will haul them up Highway 49 through Hattiesburg and Jackson and points north. Coffee is another big industry, especially when you get into Nicaragua, Costa Rica. And tobacco is also another big one, usually used to make cigars. This is better grade tobacco than American tobacco. Nicaragua is really big into tobacco making. In the Caribbean, tourism is the #1 industry. People go to the Caribbean to vacation, to sit on a beach, to drink a drink, to watch the sunset. Another big industry in the Caribbean is raising sugarcane, and that sugarcane can be turned into sugar, or it can be turned into rum. Tobacco is another big crop grown here, used to make cigars in places like the Dominican Republic, Cuba, the Bahamas. Offshore banking is another big deal. Offshore banking is where you take money and you put it in a bank in somewhere like the Caymans or Bermuda. And if you keep it there, you keep it out of the reach of the American government, so they cannot collect taxes on it. And so a lot of really, really rich people can do this because they have enough money to do this. They'll put their money in a bank account in the Caymans, and it can't be taxed, and the federal government can't get a hold of it. Another issue of the Caribbean are hurricanes. As you can see this map right here, this is a line of every hurricane from 1850. You can barely see the Caribbean because it's so covered with lines just from the hurricanes. Another big area is this area just south and west of Mexico. And a lot of the languages spoken in the Caribbean are Patois, which are mixed languages, also called Creole. And this is where you have a mix of a couple of languages, Spanish and English, or Spanish and English and like a African language or a native language. In countries like Cuba, you have Fidel Castro, who is technically still the leader of the country, even though he's given the power to his brother. And the U.S. has imposed an embargo since Castro came to power, because Castro is a communist, and back in the 1960s, the United States was very much against communism. So we placed an embargo on Cuba, so no shipment of goods can come in from Cuba, and we can't send any goods out to Cuba. Now, the restrictions have slowly eased over time, and now people can actually go back to Cuba to visit family or on missions, or students studying can go to Cuba now. We also have Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is actually a U.S. Commonwealth. Like Cuba, Puerto Rico once belonged to the United States. It is now a Commonwealth, which is a term that the U.S. kind of uses as a term for a loosely associated state or an organized territory. Puerto Rico is not a state. It's not a territory. It's somewhere in between. It has some self-rule. It has its own organization, but it still gets some guidance from the federal government. And then you have Jamaica. Jamaica is known for reggae music, like Bob Marley, Caribbean chicken, which is a really spicy chicken. It's really delicious. Rastafarianism, which is a religion that a lot of Jamaicans adhere to. The religion is a mix of some African religions, a little bit of Catholicism, and a lot of smoking marijuana. That's one of the big things with Rastafarianism. And in Jamaica, they speak English. In Puerto Rico and Cuba, they speak Spanish. But you could go to Puerto Rico and you could get around speaking English and they'd understand you because Puerto Rico is pretty common in the larger cities like San Juan and Ponce. One of the major crops of the Caribbean and Central America and even into South America is manioc, also called cassava, yucca, or yucca. It is related to the magnolia. It's a root, kind of like a potato, and it's served like a potato. You can boil it, you can bake it, you can slice it into slices like au gratin, you can cut it into fries and fry it up, and it produces a lot per acre. It's one of the most heavily productive crops in the world. South America is a hollow continent. If you look at the map of South America, most of the cities are on the edges, with very few in the middle. Because of this hollowness, there have been a lot of border disputes over time between the countries. Bolivia and Paraguay fought over this border here. Paraguay fought Argentina, Brazil, and Uruguay right here. Chile fought Bolivia and Peru. Peru fought Ecuador. There's been a lot of fights over borders between these countries. When we look at South America, the things that are very important are, well, number one, Venezuela produces a lot of oil. It's a very oil-rich country. The gas company Citgo is based out of Venezuela. And the current leader of South America is a man named Hugo Chavez. Hugo Chavez just was reelected as president of Venezuela again. He does a lot of things to kind of anger America and complain about America, that America's not fair and it's not right. And he's a little loony, but he's a little entertaining. He's one of my favorite people to watch just because of some of the things that he says. Back in 2006, he gave a speech in front of the United Nations the day after President Bush spoke, and he said, yesterday, the devil spoke here, and today it still smells like sulfur up here at the podium, and that's what he's saying right here. But he likes to make fun of America and kind of thumb his nose at it, but if it wasn't for the United States, he wouldn't have anything because we keep buying his oil from him. So he's kind of like a whiny teenager who says, oh, I hate my parents so much, but they're the ones footing his bill. In Colombia, you have cacao, which is used to make cocoa or chocolate, coffee, which is in bean form here, and coca, which is used to make cocaine, the 3 C's of Colombia. These are the big crops from Colombia. Colombia's been going through civil war after civil war after civil war, so it's not the most peaceful place in the world to go to. Brazil, they speak Portuguese instead of Spanish. They raise a lot of lumber. They raise a lot of beef. If you go to McDonald's to go get a burger, that beef probably came from Brazil because land is still cheap there. And there are a lot of people willing to sell their cattle for very cheap as opposed to American farmers who have a little bit higher standard about the quality of the beef and also how much they can get paid for their beef. But they export a lot of lumber and beef from Brazil. They have a lot of tourists that go to Brazil. The beaches are very pretty. They also raise a lot of sugar, coffee, and some rubber. Argentina is well known for its beef. The beef from Argentina is very high quality beef. Chile is known for its copper, which is a metal, which is trading at a very high price right now, and the wheat that it grows in the central part of the country. Also, they grow wheat in Argentina. One other thing I want to talk about real quick is altitudinal zonation. Basically, think of it like this. If you're on a mountain, there's snow on top of the mountain, but if you're way down on the very bottom of the mountain, it's nice and warm. The higher you go, the cooler it gets. So if you want a strip down the side of a mountain, you could grow oranges at the bottom and potatoes at the top of it because of just the variance of temperature in a mountain range. It's called altitudinal zonation. Hot down at the bottom, very cold at the top. But all on one mountain. This is a lot of feet. This is a couple of miles up. This is 3 miles almost up when you get to the snow line. Real quick to close, Latin America and the U.S., we've been involved in a lot of places in the United States. We have troops currently in Colombia helping them fight their drug war. Whoops. Let me go back a page. Oh, no. We also had people that were in Panama. We were in Panama in the early 1990s. We've been involved in Nicaragua. We've gone to Cuba before several times. So we're really involved in Latin America. I'll let you make your decision on how involved we should be. But we've done a lot of things in Latin America that maybe we shouldn't have, maybe we should have. I don't know. But that's it for Latin America.